were back there in the waiting room, Melissa and I were talking about time because both of us work with people who are all around the world. So I have kind of made it a point when I'm doing things like webinars or Teams or Zooms or whatever your tool is to just say hello, right? Because I might say good morning and it's not morning somewhere else. Or in about an hour here on the East Coast, Melissa, it's going to be noon. So I'll be saying good afternoon, but you'll just be having your first cup of coffee. So, saying all that to say hello to everybody and thank you for joining us for the Community of Human and Organizational Learning's first webinar and workshop of the year. It is called the Human Error Triangle, How to Spot Risk Before It Shows Up in Metrics. And our very special presenter today is Melissa Davis. Melissa is the founder of System Sense, which is a consulting practice dedicated to uncovering the hidden systems behind human behavior and organizational performance. Melissa is also the creator of the Human Error Triangle, which is a framework that helps teams identify conditions that makes mistakes inevitable and design environments where people can thrive. Well, more about Melissa drawing from years of her experience leading root cause and preventative action programs in complex technical organizations. Her work bridges people, processes, and system design. And you've probably heard us here at the Community of Human and Organizational Learning talk a lot about people and processes the past few months. So, what Melissa is doing fits perfectly with the message that we are delivering to our audience. Melissa's approach also combines compassion with clarity, and it helps leaders replace blame, which we know is a no-no, with insight and turn recurring problems into opportunities for systemic improvement. We are very excited to have you here today, Melissa. We are going to have a presentation. We are going to have a bit of a break where you all can ask any questions of Melissa. Melissa will not take any questions while she's doing the presentation, though. So if you have something that you don't want to forget to ask during that 10-minute break, or you don't want to forget during a breakout session, please drop that in the chat for me. And I will hold that dearly. And as soon as we get that break from Melissa, then we'll make sure that she answers your question for you. So we're going to have presentation, a bit of a break where you all can ask any questions, and then we're going to have the workshop part of it. Again, any questions, please let me know. Melissa, please go ahead on and start sharing your slide deck. Welcome to the Community of Human and Organizational Learning. We appreciate you being here, and we look forward to hearing what you got to say.
Right. I'm going to start out by naming something that might sound a little odd. So this tool that I have, I call it the Human Error Triangle. It might sound like a tool that highlights human error, and yet my goal with it is to help you move past human error entirely. Just to double check, you are seeing the slide deck, right?
Yes, I am.
Yay! Okay. I was like, I should have asked that earlier. Okay, so the human error triangle, what it is it's a listening tool and it helps us recognize when systems have transferred risk to people before an incident occurs. I built this tool of facilitating hundreds of incident reviews. I work in software, and my primary participants are software engineers. And what I kept seeing over and over again was the same pattern. We'd be walking through a 5Y, and somewhere around the third Y, someone would step up and say, "It was me, I missed something." And then they would single-handedly take the blame for an incident. The thing is, their RCAs were technically correct. They had solid corrective actions. They had real root causes. That incident was unlikely to ever happen again. But their answers weren't complete. My goal then became to pull these very intelligent human beings out from the bus that they had just run themselves over with. And I helped them see where the system had quietly allowed risk to be transferred onto them. So today I'll be walking you through this tool. And by the end of the session, you'll be able to help people get left of where a lot of RCA conversations often stop and discover where the system made the human error more likely. Oop, hold on, folks. We have a technical issue I did not have before. There we go. Yes, that is me on the back of a horse shooting arrows. So, fun fact, I had never touched a bow until like September of 2019 when I ordered one off Amazon with a handful of arrows and a target, and I taught myself using YouTube videos how to shoot in my backyard. About a month in, I was hitting the target more often and less arrows were landing in my neighbor's yard. And so I decided, now is a good time to go teach my horse how to carry me down a track while I shoot arrows off his back. And you can see there in the picture, the reins are actually tied to the saddle. He has free will to go wherever he wants. So about a year into this, we were successfully competing in mounted archery competitions. And it turns out it's a really great way to unwind after a long day of incident reviews. So by title in my day job, I am a senior technical program manager at a software company. I started there in January of 2011. I was employee 114. Now, over time, that company grew significantly. Multiple acquisitions, many product lines, and over 6,000 employees worldwide. Now, by the end of 2018, all of that growth had created a problem that we couldn't ignore anymore. Incidents were being reviewed through postmortems, but the learning wasn't traveling. Action items to prevent future incidents were staying siloed within those teams, and similar incidents kept reappearing all across the different product lines. And that's when I built our root cause program from absolutely nothing. There was no, here's how you do it for software company. But it was in those meetings, in those review meetings, where I was facilitating 5 whys with highly technical teams that I became something I hadn't set out to be, a human system observer. Because what I was hearing wasn't just technical failure, it was how the system was quietly allowing people, quietly asking people to compensate. Now, when I first set up our RCA program, I knew that for it to work, people had to feel safe. I set leadership aside, including the CTO, and I made it really clear that participants could not fear losing their jobs if we wanted real learning and real solutions. I took it seriously then, and I still take it seriously today. Every RCA that we run is explicitly blameless. I train on it. It's in all my documentation. I train the GPT on it, and I open every review by naming it. This is a blameless process. We don't finger point, and then I take them through the path. If I see a name in an RCA document, I take it out. I see your role. I'm constantly training on this. And even with all that, I still wasn't getting the full story. And this wasn't intentional. No one was coming in hiding information from me. No one was protecting a narrative. And what I started to realize was the rest of the story was there. I just wasn't asking for it yet. We were stopping where human error showed up. And instead of asking the questions that would take us further left, earlier in the story, before human error enters the picture at all. So the engineers I work with, they always bring me the technical story. And they should. That part matters. But they're software engineers. So they introduce it as if I know the information like they do. Like I'm intimate with their code and their infrastructure. And honestly, for a few of these teams, I've seen them often enough that I actually know their systems in and out now. But while they're talking about things like Istio sidecar injection failures, pod evictions, and race conditions, I'm listening for different words. After a few questions, I start to hear words like manual, assumed, default, skipped, expected, or, we just thought it would work. Because those words tell me where the system quietly asked a human to compensate and risk now has entered the system. So this is the kind of 5 whys that I see every day. Technically, there's nothing wrong with it, but it smells funny to me. In software, we have this term that we call code smell. Now, code smell isn't a bug. The code works, but it's a surface signal that something deeper might just be off with it. An experienced engineer will take a look at the code and they might see a function that's too long. Maybe logic copied in multiple places. It works, but it makes you uneasy because it increases the odds that a future change is going to go sideways. That logic that you have in 3 places, if there's a bug in it, you got a bug in 3 places. If you have to update it, you have to update it in 3 places. Again, just smells funny, but it does work. So I started noticing the same things in my RCAs, not in the code, but really in their causal story. So the way my 5 whys will work with my teams is I start by asking them, what was the last bad thing that happened? And the example I have here on the screen, the last bad thing that happened here was that a deployment had to be rolled back because a configuration change caused the service to fail on startup. That's because an incorrect value was applied into that configuration. And that's because the change was made manually. Now, right here on your 3rd why, this is typically where my teams stop one line of their conversation. So instead of telling me why the change was made manually and continually down that line of whys, they now start telling me why they missed it. And I see this with bugs all the time. Production issue, error, because there was a bug. Here we missed the bug on code review, we missed the bug on testing. They stop at that 3rd why for them because the change was made manually. To them, they don't see another why. It's a manual change, Melissa. That's just what it is. So now they go in and they tell me why we missed it, because that's the world they live in. Everything is about testing and quality assurance. So in this case, they're telling me there's no validation for this scenario, and the scenario wasn't previously identified. Now, my gut instinct would be, hey, let's go to a 6 why. Tell me why the scenario wasn't previously identified. But when I have done this, I get a room of shrugged shoulders. And they want it, look at me like, why are you asking that question? And if I continually push on that 6 why wasn't this previously identified? They'll finally say, we didn't know what we didn't know. And if I let that conversation end there, the learning might also stop. We've solved for the incident. They have great solutions. Maybe this change is now going to be automated. They've absolutely added validation. They know about this scenario. It's a configuration change, so maybe it's not something we do often, but this thing isn't going to happen again. But I will have another one like it somewhere else next week. So instead of pushing on the next why, I ask a different question. This is the question for me that almost always changes the conversation. What was new here? And what I've learned is that new almost never shows up cleanly in the first pass of an RCA. And it's not because they're hiding it. It's because in most technical environments, new doesn't register as risk. New is every Tuesday. The people I work with are operating in constant change, new services, new tooling, new ownership, new workflows. It's normal to them. So when everything is new, new just stops standing out. It doesn't get flagged as important. And that's why I have to tease it out. And when I ask the question, what was new here, then the real story starts to emerge. And I can physically see it in our meetings. There's this shift when people start talking about the new thing. It's almost like they're seeing it for the first time. There's a strange excitement. They're like, oh, yeah, actually. And out comes this whole story that is not in the document. Now, this isn't a capability problem. It's a perception problem. New feels normal until something goes wrong. Suddenly, we're not talking about what failed. We're now talking about where the system might have been stretching for the first time. Once I start asking what was new, again, the conversation changed. And over time, something else happened. I stopped hearing these one off explanations and I started hearing the same kinds of stories. The more I asked the question to more people, I started hearing the same stories over and over again. And this was different incidents, different teams, different technologies, and completely different products. Almost every time that conversation opened up, the new fell into one of these three buckets. Sometimes it was a first time, something never done in production before, or maybe not done in years. Sometimes it was new people, new ownership, new handoffs, or new humans touching old systems. And almost always there was time-based pressure, a deadline that mattered, whether structurally immovable or narratively immovable. These weren't isolated incidents anymore. They were clustering around the same conditions. That was the moment I stopped looking at incidents one by one and started paying attention to the system conditions they were happening in. I didn't set out to create a model. I was just trying to make sense of what I was hearing. So the triangle holds the three conditions that keep showing up and kept showing up in incident after incident, not as causes, not as mistakes, but as conditions that change the reliability of a system. Now, I call it the human error triangle, not because it explains why people fail, but it shows where the system quietly sets people up to fail. When I say new, I don't just mean brand new code. New shows up in a lot more places than we tend to acknowledge or we even tend to recognize. It can be the first time a process is run end to end, the first time new infrastructure is exercised under real load, or the first production deployment of something that has been tested everywhere else. What makes new fragile isn't the lack of skill or care, it's that new work hasn't built up feedback yet. There hasn't been enough time for reality to push back. We can have multiple lower environments in software, right? Dev, QA, sandbox, staging, integration, all before anything ever hits production. We can test, validate, and review. But the first time something hits production is still the first time it meets real users, real data, and real behavior. This isn't a failure of testing, it's the nature of a complex system. Customers, who are also humans, will always find the use cases that you did not know existed. New also includes rarely touched paths, refactors, betas, acquisitions, and infrequent or seasonal work. Anything we don't exercise regularly behaves as new. New isn't a mistake, it's a condition. And when we don't name it, we miss an early signal that the system may be more fragile than it looks. Now, on its own, new doesn't always cause incidents, but the risk increases when new meets something else like unfamiliar. Unfamiliar is often framed as a people problem. In most systems, knowledge lives in people far more than it lives in documentation or tooling. That's not because teams are careless. It's because systems evolve faster than their documentation can keep up. And when that happens, the gap gets carried by the people doing the work. Now, the fastest way to surface that gap is when someone new has to step in. If you want to test it, throw a new person at it. Now, it's not because they're inexperienced, but because they haven't inherited the tribal knowledge yet, the shortcuts, assumptions, and context that build up over time. This is where your implicit steps are going to show up. These are the steps that no one consciously skips. They just stop being visible once they become muscle memory. They don't live on a checklist because for the people doing the work every day, they just don't feel like steps anymore. Now, the risk shows up most clearly at boundaries and in orphan systems. These are places where ownership is unclear, handoffs are incomplete, or the system quietly assumes someone else has the context. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where Everybody else thought everybody else had the ball. Reorgs, new ownerships, and team transactions amplify all of this. Not because anyone did anything wrong, but because people don't know what they don't know until the system asks them to. The point here isn't to call out humans for not knowing something. It's easy to point at the junior dev. The point is to recognize how often systems rely on human memory to stay functional and how fragile that becomes as organizations move faster, scale, or experience turnover. Unfamiliar is not a people problem, it's a condition and a signal that the system depends on knowledge it hasn't yet made visible. And when unfamiliar meets something else like time pressure, the risk increases. So pressure in my world is usually time-based, and there are two kinds of deadlines that I see over and over again. The first are what I think of as structurally immovable deadlines. These are real. They're enforced externally, and missing them has concrete, often financial consequences. So our software handles tax compliance, the kind of taxes that are associated with invoices. Our deadlines are often driven by government agencies, regulatory changes, jurisdictional rate updates, tariffs, or mandated cutover dates. Yet sometimes it's contractual with customers, vendors, or maybe third-party providers, or a date truly cannot move without financial, legal, or operational impact. In those situations, the pressure is not optional. The system must respond to it. But there's a second kind of deadline that I see maybe even more often, and that I call narratively immovable deadlines. These are the deadlines where we believe we can't move because of the story around them. Maybe we've already told the customer the date. Leadership has already announced it. The comms has gone out. It just feels too late to question it now. So the date hardens, not because it's structurally enforced, but because no one feels safe or able to challenge it. And once pressure is present, regardless of the type, the system behavior will change. Safeguards get traded for speed, reviews compress, testing narrows. Often I'll see suddenly we're only testing happy path. Exceptions get made, and not because people are reckless, but because the system is now optimizing for time. This is where pressure becomes dangerous, not because deadlines exist, but because they quietly remove slack from the system. And what matters for this model isn't whether or not the deadline was truly immovable or only felt that way. What matters is the pressure was present, and once it is, the risk increases. Under pressure isn't a failure of planning or discipline, it's a condition that changes how systems behave. And when pressure shows up along something new or unfamiliar, the system's going to enter a very different risk state. So this is how I think about risk when I'm assessing a system. If I hear one of these conditions, new, unfamiliar, under pressure, I don't jump to conclusions. One condition on its own doesn't mean that something's going to fail. It just means to me the system is a bit more vulnerable than it may look. When two of them show up together, now you've got my attention. That's when I start to slow the conversation down because the system is now operating with less margin for error. And when all three are present, I consider the system to be in a high risk state, regardless of whether or not the incident has already happened or not. The escalation usually isn't named before the incident. We can certainly point to it after the outage and say, yeah, of course this was risky. Like, look at this. But at the time, it feels like normal work to everyone that was involved in it. And because it was normal, we don't respond to it as risk. And the reason I care about this during an RCA isn't to better explain the past, it's because the same conditions almost always existed before the incident, and they still exist after the incident. If we can learn to recognize them as conditions instead of outcomes, we can start asking different questions upstream. Questions like, where did the system lose slack? Where did it depend on memory? And where did we treat new work as routine? The tool doesn't solve incidents. it helps us see where systems are quietly becoming fragile so we can intervene earlier instead of rediscovering the same risks after something breaks. The human error triangle, it allowed me to stop looking at what the person did, and it's allowed me to start looking at what the system had handed them. It also allowed me to do that for them. For me, this tool, when I'm in these meetings with people that trust me and they've come in and they have thrown themselves under the bus and said, it was me, I left out. I left out, I put an extra comment in a line of code, I took down production, and I start asking them these questions. There's a relief that I see when they're like, oh yeah, okay, the system allowed me to do this. And one of my questions I'll typically get into when I'm trying to get them to soften up and like, come left with me, get left of your error. I'm like, if you could do it, anybody could do it. I could do it. So again, it allowed me to quit looking at what they did, but it also allowed me to help them stop looking at what they did and look at what the system had handed them. So the work for me, this is about people. It's about protecting them. The people in our systems are our most valuable resource. And this work exists because too often they're the ones absorbing the risk the system created. And I also find too often they just take it on as they fall on their sword. So by the time a person is making a mistake, they've made a mistake, a lot has already happened around them. They're working in something new or something unfamiliar, or they're under pressure where the slack has quietly disappeared, or they could be working under all three conditions at once. The risk doesn't start with the human, it arrived with them. What the human error triangle helps surface is where that transfer happened, not at the moment of failure, but earlier, upstream in the incident, left, left there in the system. I'm always asking them, especially when they bring me like testing, oh, we're going to fix it in testing. I'm like, that's great. How can I get you left of testing? I love that you're testing for this, but where could we have solved for this left of testing? And for me, this is that subtle place, though, where even strong RCA practices can stop short. Not because we blame people, but because we can reach closure. When my engineers come to me with really good, like, here's why this won't ever happen again, I have at times gone, that's great, we're done here. Closure feels really good. Technically correct explanations feel complete. And once the failure makes sense, that conversation naturally wants to stop. We're humans. We understand what happened and we understand how it failed. But stopping there doesn't change the system that these same people have to go back and work in tomorrow. What actually reduces recurrence isn't a better explanation of the failure, it's better visibility on how the system became fragile. And then a willingness to design for that fragility instead of asking our humans to compensate for it. That's what this tool is for. It's not to scrutinize people, but to make the systems they operate in safer. All right. I'm going to go ahead and take a breath. That was a lot. and see what questions y'all have. I am going to go in after we do this Q&A here. I have an example that I will share with you all, and I'll give you what we're going to do in the breakout. But now I'm going to take a break from talking and find out what questions you have.
Melissa, that was a great overview of your systems product. There was a lot of comments here in the chat about different types of products that are available out there, and we appreciate that feedback about all of those. When you are doing this type of presentation, while we're waiting for questions to come in, right? What do you see or what question do you get asked most often?
I don't know that I do. I honestly, I'll be honest with all of you. This is the first time I've actually presented this out to a group. I typically work with this within my group of people. And again, Have not seen all your questions. You're probably going to tell me, Melissa, you're not inventing anything new. This is already exists out there. This for me was a moment of necessity. I have now facilitated over 1,900 RCAs with this same group of people in this company, and I still use this yesterday. I had a group that came in, really smart people. I work with them all the time, and they got really hung up on a knowledge gap. And they were just, and I was like, you guys, hold on, and their solution was training, and we're going to send them to courses. And I said, that's great, but what happens when I come in and I do it, or the next guy and the next guy? Well, I don't have the technical answer for how they were going to fix it. By showing them in the system where it allowed this thing to happen and where it introduced it, and for them, it was absolutely unfamiliar. They sat there and they were like, wait, we can fix this in Terraform. And they came up with a guardrail right there on the call that they had not walked into the room with yet. And that to me is the win with this tool. So I said, I so much don't present it to people that I'm within RCA when you're already in the community, but it's in that work that I do every day. The people that are actually in the system coming to me with their incidents, and it's really eye-opening when now
Yes,
yeah.
I appreciate your honesty in that a lot of the things I find that we use in industry have been adapted from other models, and we bring them into our environment and we make them fit our particular business. So I do like that you have been able to do that in the tech world. We do have a few questions. We have one from LR, and he or she, sorry, asks, how did you get buy-in from senior leaders for your model?
Yeah, so a couple things. I have an amazing amount of autonomy in my work. um, and senior leadership trusts me, but it came from early on going toe to toe, honestly, with the CTO and some leaders and saying, this has to be blameless. You've got to trust me here. And I also had up against me, so step into this role, I create this program. And I got to tell you guys, there's nothing in my industry on here's how you do a RCA program for software. So I stole from all of you and I learned about manufacturing and healthcare and aviation and then tweaked it for this group of people. Fascinating too, because they speak a very different language than I do. They speak in tech terms, but they were so excited to have somebody else run their RCAs than them doing postmortems. They were like, get in here and help us. So leadership, absolutely had to go toe to toe with them. And they were like, okay, we trust you to do your thing. I actually found I was a little more successful in we pull the CTO in. He wants to be in like a sub one. A sub one would be an outage. And I actually, on the days that like my bigwigs wouldn't show up, I was like, this is a little safer, folks. I can actually get somewhere. We've now everybody speaks the same language, so we're all good. But one of the things I had happen early on was we were suddenly getting more of these on the calendar than we expected. So I start the program off. I am told you'll probably see 5 to 6 of these a month. I was seeing 8 a week. And I get pulled in and they're like, what's going on? Are we having more incidents? And I said, no, 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 hold on. You're having the same amount of incidents you've always had. You just see them now. Because people in the engineering department, which was growing, found out that they could come to me, come run their thing through the program and through the process, and they weren't going to get in trouble. And because we know how to program, their action items were actually going to get prioritized in the roadmap. So they started seeing this, even the outliers that were like, oh, I'll never, I had every once in a while somebody would come to me early and say, so and so said they're not going to do your thing. And I'd go sit with so and so and make them my best friend. And now they'd become a champion in my program. So again, leadership was like, what do you mean you're doing 8 of these a week? And I do more now. And again, like you were having these incidents, you just didn't know about it. So once we made it blameless and showed people the system, not their mistakes, again, it became really popular.
Thank you. And LR, if that did not answer your question, please drop something in the chat. Jeremy asked, LR gave us a thumbs up. Thank you. We're looking to improve our systems through automation. How do you reconcile over automation versus boredom as a risk?
Yeah, interesting. I haven't had that be an issue yet because when I can automate more manual things, it actually frees up my engineers to now go be more innovative. You know, when they're not stuck bogged down by the things that could be automated, they get more time and more brain power to go do the really cool stuff that they can do. We try to commit to part of one of our sprints per year. So I think we do it 4 times a year. We do what's called a global hackathon. And we encourage teams to get together and they come up. I am so blown away at how innovative these people that often are stuck doing manual configurations all day, how brilliant they are. So what I find is it hasn't been an issue as we automate more. It actually frees up the brain power to then go be innovative. You may need to then give them that outlet to say, hey, it's okay to go be innovative. But that is also a little bit of a foundation of our company. We've always really encouraged innovation, and that hackathon has been a big caveat for that. And now it's an AI first company, so now with AI and the tools that we've given everybody, it's pretty mind blowing what they've come up with.
Perfect. Thank you. My buddy Steve says, wonderful presentation, of course. I am curious if you have found that what we look for is what we find. By focusing on the inquiry on new, unfamiliar, and under pressure, what error-inducing conditions may we miss?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, and I bet we do look for what we find. And I don't know that I see it. I certainly don't know that I see it in every RCA. And I am getting more teams as we use this that'll come to me and tell me the new unfamiliar or pressure. That's a great question. Like, what else would we see out there? For me, these are so consistent. I'm trying to think off the top of my head if I've seen anything lately that doesn't really fit this bucket. Um, yeah.
Well, we can certainly come back to it as everybody is in their breakout sessions. If something comes to mind, then we can circle back.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the biggest things we run into, and I do a little different work around systems sometimes, and I will break them out into different layers. And I think one of the more uncomfortable moments, which I actually get excited about in an RCA, uh, is when our fifth Y will come point to a business decision. So we're in the room, and if it's not a big event, a big outage, the leadership may not be there with us. And that moment in the system will actually point to there was some business decision made way over here that has now resulted in where we are today in this incident. And that's a fascinating moment because that may not be new, unfamiliar, or time-based pressure, but it's time to revisit this decision. And that means going to leadership and saying, hey, this thing you decided on 2 years ago, it's now causing this. And we've done that. We actually had a pretty amazing outcome when we've gone and done that.
Thank you. Philip asks, how does the system deal with complexity where cause and effect are not clear and straightforward?
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know if I have a clean answer to that. I think that might be something we kind of live in a little bit in my world every day because it is highly complex. The cause and effect isn't straightforward. Yeah, I don't know. It'll show up in an incident, or it might be something that we keep absorbing again as the humans. That's where I find for my humans, and I write about this quite a bit. I might discover where they've put in workarounds. There are times that if we can't explain it, they'll work around it.
Perfect. We are going to, and my guy John, hello, hello. We're going to pick up with his comment after we come back from the breakout sessions. So we will start with John and then we'll go to Vince and a couple of the others that we have here in chat after we come back from breakout. How's that sound, Melissa?
Oh, that sounds good. Actually, well, yeah, that'll work.
All
My
right, perfect.
my guess is you guys are going to zip through this pretty quick. But I will also put it in I've got these next two slides. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put it in the chat if that works out. So I'll give you an example of an incident. And my ask here is you're not going to solve the incident or necessarily find a root cause or rewrite the history or judge them or the people or the decisions. It's where are these where do you hear the conditions? Where do you see when the risk is escalating? Um, where does new show up? Where does unfamiliar show up? Where does the pressure show up? And how does the risk change those conditions? And that's it. We're just, we're not really looking to solution this one, but just run it through that lens and see what you find. Now, here is my scenario. And anyway, for this one, we've got the software service experienced intermittent failures. You can read that following a routine scaling event. The issue initially was described as a transient infrastructure condition. The service stabilized without rollback. So I think most of you are familiar with in software, we have deployments. So if a deployment doesn't work well, we have the ability to roll them back. Let's see. During the review, ownership of the service had recently been transitioned to a new team. Autoscaling parameters had just been adjusted earlier in the quarter and had not been revisited. The system had never previously operated at this scale. The scaling event occurred during a customer-facing launch window. At the time, the changes were considered low risk because they had been in place and the system had been stable. Do we have anyone that wanted to share first? Anyone that wants to represent their group?
Well, I'm just going to go ahead on and volunteer our scribe. Gates, you want to razzle dazzle the people with what we came up with?
Razzle dazzle seems optimistic, but I'm happy to share. Uh, and to observe that turning your camera on gets you volunteered for many things, which is I suspect why so many people's cameras are off. In our group, we explored I think some of the obvious conditions that created an environment in which this rollout could have some errors. The primary ones being the transfer from an old team to a new team and wanting to know what systems were in place to support such an ownership transfer, and then try to explore if this is the expectation, how did things depart from that expectation when the new team took over. Similarly, the idea that this system was now operating at a new scale, and so there were questions about again a new parameter that's unexplored and therefore has again right potential for something to go sideways. And then last but not least, just looking at things like the idea of, this was described as both a routine scaling event and that auto scaling parameters have been adjusted. So there was some gap between how they imagined things are going to go, the work is imagined, and then the work as it actually occurred. So the work is done, and trying to look back into that operational gap to identify the places where there were variables at play that were not identified, and not the idea of the new conditions creating not just the environment, but likely creating the error, whatever it may have been, and that the people involved were unlikely to actually be making a purposeful decision to do something wrong, but rather they were operating as was imagined, and the conditions took them down the wrong path.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anyone else, did you guys all get the same, or is there anything different come out of that?
Willing to share some additional comments from our discussion. We also were catching those parts that were new, but we also were calling out some parts about unfamiliar. So the recent transition from the team that had been owning it to a new team. So there's some unfamiliarity. And then also that third corner about some of the pressure. So it being customer facing and that there's this window of time that we're trying to watch and be more attentive to it. So feeling like there really are elements from what's been described and captured of all three corners, which Melissa, you had suggested that would put us in a high risk scenario, and we would want to be looking a lot closer at it.
Yep, absolutely. Yep, and that's right. You've got a customer facing launch window, right? So there's a lot of pressure around that. By then we've told the customers it's coming out. We have probably announced it somewhere through marketing. Everyone is expecting it. And in this case, we've also happened to throw a new team at it. We made some changes earlier in the quarter and we hadn't revisited them. There's a really good chance the new team doesn't know about those. And if they didn't go in and double check and ask and revisit. Also, one thing we'll see often when we talk about ownership transition, that's a really nice way of saying sometimes we maybe let some people go. So it's a one thing when you have an ownership transition and you can just go tap that other person on the shoulder and say, hey, can you tell me about this thing? But when they have disappeared and are no longer available to have that conversation with, that's a lot of times where we'll see some real unfamiliar happen.
Awesome. Do we have anybody else with anything else different that you might want to share? Well, Melissa, I see that we have someone logged in as Noel or maybe Noel, and it looks like a room full of people. I would be interested if there's a rep in there who might want to talk about what they discussed on the breakout.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. We are here from the BHP Potash Project here in Saskatchewan. We join in as an impact group, and we are here at our management team. Discussion have been going well, and we have been zooming in. One of the things that we discuss as a entity, we have a big project here, and we have a lot of our subcontractors that we have to work with. And when, as you know, on these big scale projects, when an incident happens, regardless of which contractor, it affects the entire company. And therefore, some skills will be able to, how we are able to zoom in and our lessons learned, and to bring that as wide as possible so we can learn as a team and not just, put the blame on one contractor, and we all can benefit from it. So those are some of the areas we look into, and just to how we react when something happens, and the time spent with that.
Thank you so much. I am going to be at First Nations University, which is up near you, over the summer. So thank you guys for joining in and thanks for sharing. Melissa, going back to the chat from John, he said, great presentation. Love that you're helping your team grow accountability, peer to peer, and find solutions. We had a question from Vince. And his question was, when we practice RCAs with our teams, people tend to fall back into blaming individuals, even though they understand the concept of human error. Because they don't practice this mindset often, it seems difficult for them to apply it consistently. His question, what would you recommend for helping teams build this skill? Should we use pilots or another approach?
Yeah, so one, I have a little bit of my angle and where I come from might be unique to everyone. My teams, as much as they think they should and want to maybe do their own RCA, and occasionally my company is like, Melissa, maybe instead of you being the facilitator, they do it on their own. That's why I push pretty hard on I facilitate most of the meetings. But we could also scale that and making sure we do train this idea. So the number one thing I ask people when they set up an RCA is go in and assume, and we all know this if you're in RCA, but your participants might not know, assume everyone is doing the best with what they had at the time, right? So having those best intentions. Also, I'm a big fan of what I call observing a system as far as interrogating it. It reacts much better when I observe it. So when I'm coming in over the top and I see somebody doing something and I am human, I will look at it and go, why did you do that? I look for the function. There's a reason they did it that way. So that's sometimes what I teach people how to do. And so we'll give fun examples that don't have anything to do with the work they're in, of somebody working around a system, and then, hey, can you see why they did this? What was the function? What I have found with the people I work with every day is when I ask what I have a career that I say is based on asking stupid questions, these questions sometimes feel stupid. If I'm asking you what was new, there is a moment where they look at me and be like, I can't believe she's asking that question. And then they say, oh, and phew, here it comes. So just a few times of me going in and asking that will help them to now, when they're in a situation, take that pause and say, what's new? What's unfamiliar? Where's my pressure?
Thank you. And we're going to do a couple more questions and then we're going to go to our next breakout. This one from Alan. Thank you for a great talk, Melissa. How would you apply the human error triangle in sectors where there are legal ramifications associated with human error incidents? The need of looking for someone to blame.
Yeah, I think I'm really fortunate that I am not in one of those sectors at this time, though I anticipate I'll have to interact with one. That's tough because even if you can show, to me, it's really trying to point out the new. And then of course, we haven't talked about this. The point of this was to introduce the tool to you, but then it's how do you solve from there? I can solve every day of here's the bug and here's we're solving the bug, but how do I get so to me, legal ramifications associated with a human error, it's I would point back to that. How are we solving for it going forward? How can I show that this human and no other human can make this error again? How are we solutioning for that? Because the thing is, when we blame a human and we take a human out, and I have seen this, we can remove a human and say, okay, we had to discipline or remove the human that made the error. It's only time. If you didn't go solve at the system level, another human will come make the same error. So I don't have a good answer for legal ramifications because it's not something I work in every day. But if that is the solution to remove the human or discipline the human, another human will come along and do it if you didn't fix the system condition that put the risk on in the first place.
Thank you. And we'll take this question from Rebecca and then we will go to our next breakout. Rebecca asks, do you still run into interpersonal conflicts in the midst of your work, or has this improved it? Do you see any stifling of growth for those involved at all?
Yeah, I love that question. I actually find that I have huge groups of software teams that trust me maybe more so than other people. Interpersonally, it can cause a issue for me when I have maybe more transactional leaders that don't understand the work and then are looking at me like, why are you doing it that way? Or one of my things I like to hear is, you're really good at the facilitation, but, so for me interpersonally, sometimes it causes challenges for me with leadership, and I don't have a problem with that. I'm happy to take that on. What I have found is it has built a ton of trust between me and the engineering teams I work with every day. And then I don't really see any stifling of growth. If anything, I see a little shift in the culture and a shift in the mindset. And when I started this, the biggest shift in the culture I saw was, instead of hiding mistakes or just sort of keeping them under the rug, I used to say my job was to pull up the rug, get everything out from under it, and not let us put things back under it. People come to it. So in our RCAs, we have severity levels. Sev 1 would be like an outage. Sev 2 might be a group of customers are impacted. Sev 3 is operational impact. And then Sev 4 is the, it's not broken, but I'd really like to run it through your program before it gets broken. And what I'm seeing over time is an increase in what I call Sev 4. And that's what I want. I always go back and say, what I'm showing metrics to leadership, because they love metrics. Um, I want more Sevs and Sev 3 and Sev 4 because those are going to reduce Sev 1 and Sev 2. If I can get into your system, Sev 3, Sev 4, work with the people and solve for these things here, you are going to have less Sev 1, Sev 2. And that's what I've seen in the culture, is that more and more people are stepping forward for what we call near misses. I do want to address, just for one moment, we have some time for this. So my presentation today, I'm coming at a really different angle than a lot of RCA practitioners. I don't work in a world that is based in safety. My industry, there is no regulation for why you must do RCA. So when I went to go create this, there was nothing for software. There's a big software company that uses what they call correction of errors. Doesn't sound very nice, and it maybe isn't very nice. And what I wanted to come up with, and so I went to everything that I saw out there, and then I really had to tweak it to where I could get these folks, these really intelligent people, to show up and use it. So again, a lot of this is experience based, but it's an industry where even on its worst day, nobody is injured, nobody dies. But if you were impacted by the CrowdStrike incident or any AWS outage, you know that when software today goes down, you know, there are businesses that cannot move. We do a product, we use more and more companies and more jurisdictions across the world are using what's called e-invoicing. So the sales tax is due, or whatever tax in the invoice, at the moment it's calculated. The government, through, software, pulls their portion out. So instead of you paying a quarterly or an annual invoice, it's paid right now. Anything is wrong in those systems, there are entire trucks of goods and services that cannot move in that moment. So that's what our near misses or our plane crashes might look at. We could be looking at millions of dollars lost in moments depending on the situation. So it's interesting when you run RCA around that, because again, humans are not going to get injured, and they're very unlikely you're going to have a fatality, but there could be huge impacts on the reputation of the company and certainly financial impact.
Thank you, Melissa. And I know I said that that was going to be the last question, but this one is just a tiny one because I think it's a point of clarification from Lisa, who is in nuclear. And she said that they use some different terms than we use in other industry. And what is RCA? And Rick had said root cause analysis, and it appears that she agrees with that. Melissa, when you use RCA, are you also referring to root cause analysis?
I am. And honestly, I'm impressed I didn't slip up and say it today. We actually call our program our CAPA. For us, that's root cause analysis and preventive action. And that is because we wanted to make sure we had a big highlight on, we're not just root causing, we're coming up, we're preventive action. And to me, we even talk about small PA and big PA. And small PA is going to be those like, here's the ticket, here's the JIRA ticket, here's how I'm making sure that bug doesn't happen again. I'm improving testing, I'm improving code review, I'm putting an automation in here. But to me, big PA is what we talked about today. We're going into the system and we're saying, hey, where is it new, unfamiliar? Where can I go shore up the system across the board so we're seeing less and less of these types of things?
Okay, great. Do you have your slides for your next breakout that you want to drop in the chat for us?
I don't have a slide for the next breakout. My intent of the next breakout was for you guys to go back in and work this through your own examples. I'm anticipating you may have done some of that in the first breakout, but take the time to share what you do see in your industries. Where do you see new, unfamiliar, and time-based pressure? And again, the story for me here is when I am doing an RCA and I am sharing that, it sounds really like, yeah, to all of us, but not to the people I'm working with on the other side. When I'm having to point out to software engineers and I'm asking what was new, they're not thinking of it that way until I say it. Time-based pressure. The reason I broke out the time-based pressure into the two different kinds is because they don't often see, time-based pressure that could be, maybe we could have had a conversation around it. They don't see it that way. To them, if leadership announced it and it's done, it's going out, it's going out, so to them, what I think we could have gone back and maybe raised our hand and had a conversation about. So again, in your world, do you see that, and what does that look like, where you come in over the top of it, run your RCA? Yeah, Melissa, we all know this model, but do the people on the other side, where do they not know that they're under these conditions?
Melissa, we should have everyone funneling back in from their breakouts now. You won't believe, Melissa, how quickly R Rick raised his hand to volunteer to be our spokesperson from our group.
Yay!
Or it's that I had my camera on and got volunteered a
There's
little
another
bit.
one.
One of the threads we were digging into as we were talking about some of these different parts, one of the comments sparked the reminder that in some of our software areas, we talk not only about placing risk or blame and avoiding that, but also there's times where some organizations have this idea of a hero or a rock star who's coming around to save projects that are at risk or struggling. And that can be masking a lot of the system issues, and it can also be its own indication that there are other system issues. And so we were having some deeper discussions about this flip side of a person filling in for a weak process, not exactly the same as, and a person was the point of failure in the process, but that the process is weak enough that it needs that kind of sustenance. So, how do we make the process more robust to carry more of the risk, carry more of the day to day, make it more predictable, reliable?
Yeah, I love that. I love it, especially because I see it. I have some pretty amazing superheroes that I interact with all day. And I have one in particular that is the best at running into the fire, saving all the puppies and kittens, scooping them all up, and he runs out of the fire, but he never tells anybody what he did when he rescued all the puppies and kittens. So now on the other side of it, whatever little tweak he did in the database, I see later. And I'm like, hey, could we stop doing that? So yeah, that's it. That is that's a whole, I think, speech in itself. But it's points of success, but absolutely heroes. In a lot of situations, we absolutely we celebrate them. And granted, we should at some point, but I think we also set them up a little bit, where they're absorbing all that risk. And then the day that they're, good luck on them ever taking PTO, getting some time off, So yeah, I feel that. No, that's a great observation.
Thank you, Rick. Anyone else want to share from any of their other breakouts?
Well, our group, we struggled a little bit with getting down to a granular item. And the last 30 seconds, we kind of settled on one. Again, talked about those higher level things, but my site, we're working a lot on new PPE, and kind of interesting to think about it the way it worked. We were worried about some of our older, more tenured employees struggling to use the cut resistant gloves that we're pushing and actually making a requirement. But one of the things we're finding is that they struggle a lot less than we expected. And it's the new folks coming in that, we thought, oh, no cultural hangups on it. They'll be able to jump right in. But one of the things they're doing is responding to the time pressure to keep up with production with the more tenured employees. They tend to skip that step of putting on the gloves. And I think that kind of, you look at those three things, that'll add a different light to it. So
Great,
That,
great, great.
I love that. That's a really interesting idea that a new person naturally might have some time pressure, even though the system isn't necessarily putting it on them, but they're feeling it in order to keep up with everybody else. That makes a lot of sense. That new person might already just come naturally with some time-based pressure.
Well, speaking of time-based pressure, we have about 3 minutes left in our workshop for today. And Jessica, who usually hides behind the scenes and does all of our tech stuff, she is going to give you all some announcements about some upcoming programs in the conference.
Uh, Thanks, Loranda. Yeah, I like to stay behind the scenes, you guys. I'm the man behind the curtain. It's my role here. But the question earlier regarding the legal ramifications is a perfect segue to make a first agenda announcement for our June conference. While the final agenda is not set and we're still working through what all of that looks like, the Resiliency Engineering Lab at Ohio State University is sponsoring one of our keynote speakers for this year, and it's kind of a big deal. Over our last several conferences, we've had a big healthcare push because there is a lot of, there's a huge need in this country for reform in the medical industry. And so we've referenced a case regarding a nurse who was convicted on 2 felony accounts, homicide and abuse of an elderly patient. I am excited to announce that we will have that nurse, Redonda Vaught, will be one of our keynote speakers at the conference this year. And so she will share her experience of what it's like being that person that was legally responsible for an event at her in her care. So Redonda will be one of our keynote speakers. She'll be at the conference all week. And early bird pricing for the conference ends at the end of this month. So if you want to take advantage of the discounted pricing, now's the time to do it. And fingers crossed, we'll be able to announce a first draft agenda probably within the next 2 weeks. So that's our big announcement regarding the conference. And our next workshop will be in May. So I want to thank you all for joining us for this new format for the community. We've been doing webinars for the last 5 years. And so thanks for joining us for this revised format. It's been great having you all join us today.
Thank you. And Jessica, when you talked about Redonda, Steve's eyebrows nearly jumped off of his face. So hopefully we
Yeah.
will be seeing many of you in June at the conference. Please reach out to me or Jessica if you have any questions about registering or volunteering. We would love to not just have you as a conference goer, but also someone who's helping to shape the future of the conference. And Jessica, I don't think Charles sees doing it 365 days a year as the future, but we'll pitch that to him next planning meeting. I appreciate each and every one of you being here. Appreciate everything that you brought to the community today, Melissa. Thank you all, and I hope you have a great day.